Have you ever seen someone judged solely by the shoes they wear or the watch they don't? Inside Solstice Prime, the flagship restaurant perched on the 57th floor of the Valmont Hotel, where each meal costs more than $500, head chef Gavin Thornhill stood face to face with a new woman. She wore a plain white shirt with no label, her hair tied back with a cheap grey plastic clip. No perfume, no makeup. She looked as though she'd just stepped off a suburban bus stop. No one paid her any attention until Gavin spoke, his voice cold as Steel Table 3 just ordered the Wellington. "You make it. If it burns, you're out." No greeting, no instructions, no time to adjust. Just a verdict handed down under the skeptical eyes of the entire kitchen. Someone's hand quietly tightened around a paring knife. A few restrained breaths filled the room. Everyone knew the Wellington here was death. In the oven, a dish with a recipe guarded like a family heirloom by Gavin himself. No one else had ever been allowed to touch it. The woman whose file said her name was Evelyn Lane just smiled. No excuses, no bowing her head. And no one could explain why her eyes didn't show fear. They were simply still, deep enough to make even a seasoned man like Gavin flinch, though he didn't know why. No one in that kitchen realized the woman standing before them wasn't there to train. She was there to see whether the heart of the culinary craft, a world she herself once helped build, was still beating in that place or had long died in the echo of shouting and arrogance. And none of them could have imagined that the Wellington she made that day wouldn't just astonish the guests. It would expose a man and awaken an entire system. She called herself Evelyn Lane. But if you've ever worked in the world of fine dining, her real name might make your knees buckle. Evelyn Royce, founder of the Royce Culinary Group, the first female CEO to earn 3 consecutive Michelin stars in 3 different countries, and the woman Forbes once hailed as the culinary heart of the century. 2 years ago, Evelyn vanished from every headline. No one understood why a titan like her would walk away from power, from the spotlight, from the empire she had spent 2 decades building. What they didn't know was this: after the sudden death of her husband, who was also her co-founder, Evelyn fell into a void no number of stars or tributes could ever fill. She could no longer taste. She no longer believed in the words "bon appétit." And one day, she made a decision no one else would dare to put aside her name. Go undercover into the very world she had once created in search of an answer. Did the kitchens that bore her name still deserve to exist? Evelyn traveled through 8 cities, working every position, from dishwashing to kitchen prep. No one ever recognized her. She always used a different name, dyed her hair, and carried a coldness just sharp enough to discourage questions. And now, Solstice Prime, the crown jewel of the empire she once laid the foundation for, was her final stop. But what she hadn't expected was this: the kitchen here, though gleaming and prestigious, was cold as marble. The staff moved like machines. They feared mistakes more than they feared a dish lacking salt. No one smiled, and the man leading it, Gavin, had no need for anyone better than him. He only needed everyone to know who the king of the kitchen was. Evelyn knew that type well, because once she had been that person. And this time, she didn't come to judge. She came to see if anyone still had the courage to cook with heart inside a kitchen ruled by fear. The next day, the kitchen of Solstice Prime resembled a grand stage preparing for opening night. Tablecloths were steamed with imported Italian vapor Baccarat wine glasses inspected under ultraviolet light. And on the reservation list, one VIP table included 2 members of the James Beard Foundation board. The pressure was suffocating. People barely dared to breathe. And right in that heavy silence, Gavin Thornhill, face like stone, turned again toward the newcomer Evelyn. "Why are you still standing there? Table 4 just ordered the Wellington," he said loudly, making sure the entire kitchen heard. "My version. Cook it right, or don't ever set foot in this kitchen again." No one spoke, but every pair of eyes turned to her, not out of concern, but because they knew this was a trap. The Wellington was Gavin's personal symbol. No one else had ever been allowed to cook it. No one had ever met his standards. It required a perfect mushroom duxelles beef cooked to exact medium-rare pastry that couldn't tear, get soggy, or burn, and most importantly, the modified recipe secretly missing key details just enough to ensure anyone who followed it would fail. "Careful. He's trying to get rid of you," whispered a sous chef as he handed her the recipe sheet. "No one's allowed to touch that dish but him. Everyone who tried has quit." Evelyn nodded quietly, not saying a word. She took the recipe, glanced at it once, then folded it and set it aside. Because she didn't need a single line of instruction, she had once served Wellington to the President of France, and had rewritten this very recipe by hand during a keynote at the Culinary Institute of New York inside the kitchen Gavin had only ever dreamed of entering. And today, she wouldn't just be cooking Wellington, she would turn it into a statement, not out of revenge, but as a reminder to everyone in that kitchen. Cuisine is not a battlefield between ego and fear. It is the one place where heart, technique, and emotion all belong on the same plate. A busy day, a VIP table, a dish demanding the highest level of technique, and a decision that everyone knew was anything but random. Right in the middle of the pre-service briefing, Gavin glanced coldly at the order list and spoke just loud enough for everyone to lift their heads from the cutting board's Wellington. "Table 8 requested it. Lane, you do it." A few knives froze mid-air. One person was whisked off beat. No one said a word, but in their eyes was the same look, surprise laced with pity. Beef Wellington, the most prestigious item on Solstice Prime's menu, was a dish Gavin had never allowed anyone else to touch. It was the measure of pride, precision, and power, and now he handed it to someone who had been hired less than 24 hours ago. "You've got my recipe at your station," Gavin added, not even bothering to look at her. "Follow every step exactly. If not, just leave your apron on the table." The air in the kitchen turned thick, like someone had shut off the oxygen. Evelyn stood still, not surprised, not afraid. She simply nodded, a calm, deliberate nod, as if this moment had always been expected. Gavin walked away with a satisfied expression. To him, this was a quiet execution, and the audience, his kitchen staff. A public test meant to serve as a warning to anyone who dared to think they were good enough. But what he didn't know was that in that exact moment, he had chosen the wrong person to humiliate. Evelyn stepped up to her station. On the counter, a cut of prime beef, crimini mushrooms, cheap red wine, and a recipe sheet crowded with lines of dense text, a document full of technique, but utterly devoid of soul. She read it once, then set it aside, because she didn't need to learn Gavin's Wellington. She was the one who had taught it to the world, and today she would cook it again. Not to prove she was the best, but to call back every heart in that kitchen that had been lost to fear. Without a word, without a single wasted motion, Evelyn tied her hair back, adjusted her apron, and began. She didn't glance at the recipe. She didn't ask anyone for help. She stepped into the Wellington like an artist, returning to a familiar stage after years away. She picked up the tenderloin and rotated it gently under the kitchen lights. "Too cold," she murmured, then set it aside, letting the meat reach perfect room temperature before searing a minor detail, but a crucial one most textbook-trained cooks tend to overlook. The cremini mushrooms were pushed aside, replaced with a blend of chanterelle shiitake and porcini soaked for exactly 17 minutes, what three-star chefs refer to as the third umami layer. Cognac was poured in the exact second the mushrooms caramelized, creating a sudden burst of flame in the kitchen. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply tilted the pan slightly to the left, letting the flame burn off the alcohol without charring the mushrooms. No one reminded her she was not following the recipe, because by then, the entire kitchen had stopped working. They were watching her every move not with pity, but with the kind of silence that descends when people realize something extraordinary is unfolding. When Evelyn seared the meat, she didn't use a timer. She waited until the underside reached the precise deep caramel hue, a shade that only those who've failed 100 times can recognize with the naked eye. Gavin walked past, glanced over and scoffed, "You're overdoing it." Evelyn didn't turn. She simply replied calm and certain, "Not yet." 20 more seconds, until the Maillard reaction reaches its peak. That's when the proteins tighten enough to lock in the moisture, and the browning will spread evenly on both sides. Gavin paused mid-step. That wasn't apprentice knowledge. That was the language of someone who had led an entire generation of chefs. It was the kind of wisdom never written in cookbooks, but embedded deep in the fingertips. When Evelyn spread the duxelle mixture with flawless precision, wrapped the prosciutto with not a millimeter out of place, folded everything into pastry without a single tear or excess, and carved a lattice pattern so perfect even the pastry chef froze in awe. No one dared call her the new girl anymore. Daniel, the most senior sous chef, whispered beside Gavin. "She's not some rookie. She's the kind of person who rewrote how Wellington is made." Gavin didn't respond, but for the first time in years, his eyes no longer belonged to a man in control. They were the eyes of someone slowly realizing he had picked the wrong person to humiliate. The clock on the wall read 37 minutes. Gavin looked up, frowned, then turned toward Evelyn as she walked toward the oven. "What are you doing?" "It's only been 37 minutes, he said. "You haven't even checked the temperature." Evelyn didn't stop. She opened the oven. Heat poured out, and the scent of buttery pastry and roasted beef filled the air like a wordless declaration. "It's done," she replied, her voice calm and firm. "The pastry is at a deep caramel gold. The prosciutto inside has been rendered down exactly 40%, just enough to wrap the duxelle without breaking the mushroom structure. The core temperature of the meat is at 128 degrees Celsius. After resting for 7 minutes, it will hit 132, perfect medium rare. No thermometer needed, no timer. I've cooked this dish too many times to need a tool to confirm it." No one in the kitchen spoke, but everyone felt that something had just happened. Not because of the dish itself, but because of the way she spoke. The confidence, the precision, the tone of someone who had once stood at the very top, not guessing, but stating facts. Gavin stared at the Wellington as if hoping to find a flaw, a crack, a blister. But there was none. The pastry glistened like it had been waxed. The crosshatch lattice was so precise it looked machine-printed. She placed the dish on the marble counter, in the center of the kitchen. 7 minutes to rest, she said plainly, then wiped her hands with a linen towel like it were just another training session. Gavin pulled out his phone, frantically scrolling for her name. 1 minute later, his hand froze. His eyes shifted. He looked up, his voice rasped. "Evelyn. Royce." Heads lifted like someone had just heard an explosion. Daniel nearly dropped his knife. A female sous chef stood frozen. No one said a word, but everyone knew that name. Evelyn Royce, the former head of Royce Culinary Group, the woman whose portrait hung in culinary schools as a symbol, the one who had vanished from the culinary world after a family tragedy, never to be seen again, until now. And now she was standing here in the very kitchen of the empire she built, disguised as a new assistant cook. Gavin looked as if the blood had drained from his face. Why are you here? Pretending spying, trying to trap me. Evelyn looked at him, not angry, not raising her voice, just with a strange, unshakable calm. I came to see if the place I once called the soul of cuisine was still breathing. And you, Gavin, are the reason I can no longer hear its heartbeat. No one could say a word, because when the truth becomes that clear, it doesn't need to be confirmed. People just stand there, like standing in the eye of a storm that's just fallen quiet. Gavin stood frozen. His hand still held the phone, but he was no longer scrolling. The name Evelyn Royce seemed to hover before his eyes, echoing through his mind, impossible to erase. He looked at her, the woman he had just tried to humiliate, in front of the entire kitchen, with a conflicted gaze, caught somewhere between anger, shame, and panic. You came here to bring me down, to unseat me right on my own stage, Gavin asked, trying to salvage a shred of authority. Evelyn looked him straight in the eyes, without contempt, without flinching. No, I came to find the soul of the kitchen I once helped build from the ground up, but I don't hear anything anymore, except fear. Gavin clenched his fist, his eyes drifting. I only demand perfection, he said, repeating an excuse worn thin by overuse. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice lower now, but sharper. You demand submission. There's a difference. Gavin, the kitchen fell silent. No one dared interrupt, but every word was heard crystal clear. Evelyn turned to the others, her gaze softening. Cuisine isn't about proving who's better. It's how we nourish one another with the most delicate parts of what it means to be human. Then she looked back at Gavin, her voice dropping further this time, carrying the weight of lived pain. I know, because I was once like you. I used to set standards so high that no one wanted to stand beside me. I used to believe that earning stars meant preserving a kitchen's soul. Until I lost everything. When I finally looked up from the score sheets, the man I loved most was no longer there. Gavin's chest moved slightly. His eyes reddened, but no tears came. Then why come back? He asked hoarsely. Evelyn took a breath, as if gathering all the silent years inside her. Because I couldn't let the kitchens that bear my name become places where people cook out of fear. I needed to know if anyone still had the courage to cook with their heart. And when I saw how you threw passion into the drain, I knew if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. A long pause followed. Gavin didn't argue. He didn't justify. He simply lowered his head for the first time, like someone who had nothing left to hide. Evelyn didn't reach out and didn't offer theatrical forgiveness. She simply stood there steady, like a mirror, reflecting both the worst and the best version of the man before her. And in that reflection, Gavin understood there was nowhere left to run. The Wellington had rested for exactly 7 minutes. Evelyn gave a small nod. Daniel stepped forward, his sharp blade gliding through the pastry like silk. The entire kitchen held its breath. Not a sound. The crust was golden and crisp, not no single crack, with no grease runoff. The duxelle was smooth, the mushrooms deep in color, rich with the scent of wine and herbs. The tenderloin inside was perfectly pink, every strand of meat aligned as if hand-arranged. A masterpiece beyond question. Gavin looked at that slice as if he was staring into his own past, the days when he could still feel pride without needing others to be afraid. From the dining room, an eruption of applause. A manager burst into the kitchen, thrilled. The VIP guest said, "This is the best Wellington they've ever had. A James Beard board member wants to meet the chef who made it." All eyes turned to Gavin again, but this time he didn't speak right away. A moment passed. Then he tilted his head slightly. No shouting, no command. "It wasn't me," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "This dish belongs to her." Evelyn turned. She didn't beam, nor did she politely deflect. She simply stepped forward and spoke in the calmest voice the kitchen had ever heard. "No, this dish belongs to Chef Gavin and his team. I was merely the one who brought a recipe back to the soul it once had. And if it succeeded today, it wasn't because I was here, it was because you all stopped to listen." She looked at Gavin. He didn't bow his head, but he didn't look away either. He nodded just once, as if for the first time he truly understood. 2 weeks later, Evelyn left Solstice Prime. There was no farewell party, no cameras, just a quiet afternoon where she packed up her notes, thanked each person in the kitchen, and walked out the side door, the same one she'd slipped in through on the first day, under a false name and a blank resume. The kitchens behind her were no longer what they had been. The yelling had stopped. No one feared Gavin's gaze. People shared recipes, asked each other questions, laughed more. On the new menu, the Wellington remained, but it no longer bore the name Classic Wellington. It had been renamed The Turning Point. No one asked why, but everyone understood. And as Evelyn stepped out of the Valmont Hotel, a soft breeze passed by. Behind her, the kitchen door gently closed. But from within came a sound she had never heard during her entire time there, Gavin's laughter. Small, real, and unmistakably human. The story of Evelyn Royce reminds us that courage isn't about how high you climb, it's about daring to return to where you began to rediscover what you once loved. She didn't come to reclaim fame, but to awaken a heart that had gone silent in a kitchen ruled by fear. And with quiet strength and kindness, she transformed an entire system, not with power, but with something far more real: emotion. If you've ever been misunderstood or stayed silent in a place that was supposed to be yours, leave a comment below. Share your story, because someone out there might need to hear it right now. And if you believe in the power of kindness and endings that heal, like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story, so you never miss a story that touches the heart.